Hello everyone, what is up? Welcome back to another episode of Killer Instinct, you guys. Thank you so much for joining me here today. If you're new here, hi, my name is Savannah and I am your host of Killer Instinct. Before we get started, make sure you go ahead and hit that subscribe button. That way you never miss an episode. We post weekly here on the podcast every single Wednesday. You are not going to want to miss it. We also upload the video version on YouTube on Wednesdays as well. So make sure you are subscribed. So you guys, we have made it to a new month. We are officially at our first August episode. And if you've been following along, you would know that this means that we are at a new true crime category. Over the past couple months from the beginning of the year, we have been dedicating every single month to a different true crime category. We've done unsolved cases, we've done serial killers, celebrity cases. Last month in July, we did sadistic and sinister stalkers, and the category for this month, for the month of August, is female killers. Over the course of the next few weeks, we are going to be diving into 4 cases of horrific murders at the hands of a female killer. And so with this category of female killers, there truthfully was no way we could go through the month of August without talking about one of the most infamous female killer cases, which is Jodi Arias. And as you can tell by the title of today's episode, that is what we are doing today. Now, even though we are talking about Jodi Arias, the real victim of this case is a man named Travis Alexander, and he was brutally and viciously murdered. So with that being said, let's jump right on into it today. Travis Alexander was born on July 28th, 1977 in Riverside, California, to his parents, Gary and Pamela. Now, Travis grew up in a pretty turbulent home, both of his parents being drug addicts. He was abused constantly by both of his parents, whether that be physical abuse, mental, or overall just neglect. Travis did have 7 siblings, so he came from a fairly large family, but at the age of 8 years old, he moved in with his paternal grandparents who raised him. Now, while living with his grandparents, they introduced Travis and his siblings to the Mormon Church. Now, this was really a big turning point for Travis. In the darkness of his childhood, he really felt like the Mormon religion was his silver lining. Travis was incredibly devoted towards being a Mormon, and at the age of 18, he served a 2-year-long mission in Denver, Colorado, and afterwards, he returned back to California and began working at a job for a company called PPL, which stood for Prepaid Legal Services. Now, just to put it simply, PPL was an MLM, which stands for multi-level marketing. And while some people definitely have their opinions on these types of companies, and some people believe it to be a downright scam, Travis actually really succeeded in this company. He did a lot of motivational speeches at the conferences he would attend. He really networked and he met a lot of people, leading him to a very solid group of friends. Travis was a very social guy, and he really enjoyed the fact that his friends had similar values as him. A lot of them were Mormon. They were a lot of his coworkers as well. So he did have a very solid group of friends. Now, those friends who knew Travis really described him as being the best kind of guy. And in 2004, Travis decided that he was going to make the move from California to Mesa, Arizona. And the main reason for doing this was because Mesa had a very big Mormon community, and Travis was really drawn to that. He wanted to immerse himself in that. So he made the move. He moved into a 5-bedroom house. He got 2 roommates. And for all things considered, things seemed to be going very, very well for him. Now, one thing that I want to point out about the Mormon religion and the Mormon faith is that there is a rule or a law called the law of chastity, which essentially says that you will not participate in sexual relations outside of marriage. So essentially, it is just waiting until marriage, saving yourself for marriage. And even though Travis definitely seemed like a pretty by the book Mormon, so to speak, on the outside, this was one rule or law that that he definitely did not follow to a T. Travis was very popular in the dating scene. Many girls liked Travis. He was a handsome guy, he was successful, he was really living a bachelor lifestyle, and he enjoyed his dating life. Now, that's not to say that he didn't have some conflicted emotions when it comes to it, because he knew what his religion was telling him. He was definitely a devoted Mormon. So there was some conflict internally that he was struggling with at that time as well. So now that we have an idea, a little bit of a background on who Travis Alexander was, I want to jump to the night of June 9th, 2008, and this is in Mesa, Arizona. Now, at this time, there was a woman named Mimi Hall, and Mimi and Travis had been talking for quite some time. They weren't dating. Mimi had definitely put Travis into the friend zone. However, Travis just enjoyed Mimi's company. So much so that Travis actually invited Mimi to be his plus one at an all expenses paid work conference that Travis was going to in Cancun, Mexico. Now, the trip was supposed to start the following day on June 10th. Mimi was very excited. She was eager to go on this trip with Travis. Travis was also very excited. It was supposed to be a really enjoyable trip. However, it was the night of the 9th. They were supposed to be leaving the very next day, and she hadn't heard from Travis in a few days. So she begins texting him and calling him and was not getting an answer. She then starts calling around to some of Travis's friends who also were saying that they had not heard from Travis in quite a few days. So at this point, Mimi decided that she was going to take matters into her own hands, and she ended up driving over to Travis's house herself to figure out what the deal was. Now, when she got to Travis's home, she saw that his car was there, and she ended up ringing the doorbell and started knocking a few times, however, was not getting an answer. At this point, Mimi decided that she was going to call a friend of hers, and her friend, as well as her friend's boyfriend, met her over at Travis's home. Now, at this point, the three of them are looking through windows. All of the doors are locked. They're continuously ringing on the doorbell, knocking on the door. However, they weren't getting any answer. When they looked through the windows of the home, they saw that everything seemed to be fine. Nothing seemed out of order. Nothing seemed to be in disarray. It didn't seem like there was a break-in of any sorts. And they did see Travis's dog inside of the home as well. Now, after calling around to some of Travis's family, Mimi and her friends were able to get a hold of the code for the garage at Travis's home. Now, they used this code, and luckily the garage door did open, and Mimi and her friends were able to walk into the house. So at this point, all three of them walk into the house through the door in the garage. They then walk through the laundry room, walk through the home, and then up the stairs until they get into Travis's bedroom. Now, once they get to Travis's room, they were surprised to see that Travis's bedroom door was locked. Now, obviously, this raised their concern immensely, and Mimi ran down the hall to one of Travis's roommates' room and began knocking on the door. Now, like I mentioned earlier, Travis did have two roommates named Zach and Enrique, and so Mimi went down the hall, knocked on Zach's door, and to her surprise, Zach actually did answer the door. So he was in his room this entire time. Now, when Mimi asked him why it took him so long to get to the door, why he actually never opened the door to begin with, he said that he had been sleeping, he was watching a movie, he was just very much out of it. And when Mimi asked Zach where Travis was, Zach was incredibly confused because Zach told Mimi that he just assumed that Travis and Mimi had left for their trip to Cancun. Now, at this point, Mimi revises that thought and tells him that they weren't supposed to be leaving until the very next day. Zach continued on by saying that neither him nor Enrique had seen Travis in almost a week at this point. However, again, they weren't worried because they just assumed that he was on vacation. Now, luckily, Zach did have a spare key to Travis's bedroom, and he went over and used that key to unlock the door. And what he walked in on was an absolute horrific scene. There was blood everywhere. There was blood on the walls, on the floor, and as Zach kept walking and entered into the bathroom in Travis's bedroom, it was a bloodbath. And when he turned his head to the left and looked into the shower, that is when he saw Travis laying down inside of the shower, dead. Now, immediately, 911 was called, and Mesa police showed up to the house just before midnight. Detective Flores was the lead detective in this investigation, and him and other law enforcement officials walked through Travis's home upon arrival and canvassed the entire scene. Now, what everyone was able to agree on was that other than the master bedroom, everything in the home seemed to be in order. Nothing seemed out of place, like I said earlier. However, once you got into Travis's bedroom, that all changed. But again, outside of those doors, nothing had happened. And so this told police that this was not a robbery gone wrong. This didn't seem like anything of the sorts, because what it did appear was that Travis was targeted in this attack. What police were also able to agree on when it came to the crime scene in Travis's bedroom was that even though there was blood absolutely everywhere, there were certain aspects of the room that did seem to be like they had been cleaned up, like someone had purposely gone out of their way to clean up the mess. For example, Travis's bedding had been taken off of his bed. Along with that, police questioned if Travis was put in the shower. That way, his body was able to clean up all of the blood that was on it. Now, along with that, when police looked at Travis's body and tried to vaguely examine his injuries, they noticed that his fingers and toes were a darker bluish purple color, which indicated to them that Travis had been dead for at least a few days. And because of the state of decomposition, it was difficult to tell at first glance what the exact cause of death was or what the extent of Travis's injuries were. Now, after further examination throughout the bedroom and the bathroom, police did discover a .25 caliber shell casing in the bathroom, which told them that Travis had been shot. In addition to that, while police were continuing to examine the house, they walked into the laundry room and they had seen that there was a load of laundry in the washing machine. When they opened up the washing machine, because again, they were looking for that bedding that was removed from the bed, they look into the washing machine and they see a digital camera inside of the washing machine. Now, they were able to confirm with Zach and Enrique that the camera did not belong to them. So at this point, that could only mean that the camera belonged to Travis. Now, even though police were worried about the potential water damage that this camera could have, because again, it had just been ran through a cycle in the washing machine, police were able to get the memory card from that camera and sent the card off to the forensics lab to try and recover any pictures that were taken from the camera. Now, as you might be able to imagine, police did have some questions for Zach and Enrique when they were at the house that night. Now, again, Travis had been dead for several days leading up to the discovery of his body, and police were trying to gauge and figure out how and why Zach and Enrique did not necessarily notice that Travis had been murdered. Now, upon talking to police, Zach and Enrique both explained that, again, they believed that he was already on their trip. They believed that him and Mimi had gone to Cancun together, and that was the reason for them not hearing from him for several days. Along with that, they also explained that all of these men are adult males. They're not constantly checking in with each other. They're not saying, hey, I'm going here, or I'm leaving here, or I'm coming back then. It definitely wasn't that type of dynamic. They all just came and went as they pleased and as they found necessary. So for Travis to not be seen for a couple days or not heard of for a couple days definitely wasn't out of the ordinary. Now, police did look into both Zach and Enrique's alibis, and they were able to confirm that both of these alibis did check out, and police really weren't concerned with them being any sort of suspect or anyone who could be responsible for murdering Travis. Now, once the autopsy for Travis was completed, the medical examiner was really able to detail the full extent of Travis's injuries injuries. And what Travis endured in the final moments of his life is nothing short of absolutely horrifying. I'm just going to put a disclaimer out there now that there are photos of Travis Alexander out there if you guys have seen them before or if you decide to go look at them now. The photos of Travis during his autopsy are out there. The photos of the injuries that he endured are out there. And I just want to let you know that they are extremely, extremely graphic and upsetting. And I say that because I do know that there are some people who, while listening to these cases, like to look up certain things or do their own side research on it. And I just want to fair warn you about the graphic nature of the images that you will see if you do that. During his murder, Travis had been stabbed 27 times. His throat was sliced from ear to ear, almost to the point of complete decapitation, and he was also shot in the head. Travis also had multiple self-defense wounds on his hands, showing that he did fight for his life during his attack. So at this point, police are trying to put the pieces of the puzzle together. They have an absolute brutal murder of this man, and no one can necessarily figure out what truly happened here. That was until a few days into the investigation, where police received a phone call from a woman who claimed that she was very good friends with Travis Alexander. She had heard about his passing and wanted to be of any assistance to police that she could. And that woman's name is Jodi Arias. Now, when Jodi initially made this phone call, she had spoken to a different officer who then directed her to the lead detective. And upon the lead detective calling Jodi back, he asked what she had learned about Travis's death so far. What did she know about the death? And that is when Jodi claimed that she had heard Travis had died. There was a lot of blood, and that his roommate and friends found his body. And again, she reiterated that she wanted to be of any help and assistance that she possibly could be during this investigation because she wanted to figure out who could have done this to Travis. And in order to help do so, she offered to give up her DNA and a hair sample to police. So let's now take a second and talk about who Jodi Arias is. Jodi Arias, who was 27 at the time that this murder took place, was born on July 9th, 1980 in Salinas, California, to her parents, William and Sandra Arias. She has several siblings, two younger brothers, a younger sister, as well as an older half-sister, and her relationship with her siblings was a good one. She was raised in a Christian household, and her father was the owner of a restaurant. Now, for all things considered, Jodi came from a relatively normal childhood. She herself has described her childhood as quote unquote almost ideal. There really hasn't been a lot of accounts of her childhood. She was known to be quiet, she kept to herself, she was known to be friendly and very pretty. Now, once she got into her teenage years, Jodi hit a little bit of a rebellious streak. When she was in the 8th grade, her parents found out that she was growing marijuana, and her parents ended up calling the police on Jodi, who ended up letting her go with a warning. However, according to Jodi's father, he claimed that at this moment, there was something that shifted in Jodi's brain, and she felt like she had to, at this point forward, hide everything from her parents. And that continued all the way up until present day. Her parents always felt like Jodi was hiding something and that she was keeping secrets that definitely surpassed the normal teenage rebellious stage that we see in a lot of teens. Now, something that's also said about Jodi is that from her early teenage years, it was said that she always had a boyfriend. She was always jumping from one relationship to the next, to the next, to the next. She did end up dropping out of high school in the 11th grade, and she worked some odd jobs here and there while still living in California. And around that time is when she also moved out of her family home and moved in with the boy that she was dating at that time. Throughout this, Jodi continued to have a strained relationship with her parents, and that really continued all the way up until Travis's death. Now, in regards to Jodi's relationship with Travis, Jodi claimed that while they didn't start dating until 2007, they met a few months prior in 2006 when Jodi attended a PPL conference in September in Las Vegas with a friend of hers. Travis and Jodi actually ended up being set up on a blind date. Travis had an extra ticket for an event at the conference, and colleagues of his told him about Jodi. Jodi at the time was a new hire for PPL, and his friends encouraged Travis to take Jodi as his plus one to this event, which he did, and they immediately clicked. Travis definitely felt the instant physical attraction towards Jodi, and Jodi was absolutely mesmerized by Travis from day one. Now, the only issue at this time, or there were two issues, I should say, was that the first one is that Jodi, when she met Travis, had a long-term, very serious boyfriend that she had been dating. She had been dating this man for about 4 years. He was a little bit of an older guy, but him and Jodi had been dating for a substantial amount of time. Now, the second issue in this was that Jodi was not Mormon at this time, but both of these issues got resolved very quickly because immediately when Jodi returned home after this trip, she ended up breaking up with her long-term boyfriend so that she could be with Travis. And then 2 months after meeting each other in November of 2006, Jodi ended up being baptized into the Mormon church. In February of 2007, Jodi and Travis officially began dating, but they were doing long distance since Jodi still lived in California. According to Jodi, she claimed that her and Travis dated for about 6 months before mutually ending the relationship, and they maintained what she claimed to be a very good friendship then after. Now, interestingly enough, after the relationship ended, this was when Jodi decided to move from California, where she was already living, to Mesa, Arizona. Now, according to Jodi, she claimed she wanted to do this because, again, it had a very strong Mormon community and she wanted to be closer to that. And because she had been baptized into the Mormon church, this was something that was very important to her at this point. However, for Travis, he did not necessarily see it this way. Travis's friends said that he felt a little uncomfortable over the fact that after the breakup had already happened, she moved down to Arizona. He just felt like that was a little bit of an odd decision on her part. Jodi also told the lead investigator that she only last saw Travis in April of 2008, so a few months prior to his death, because that is when she claimed she decided to make the move back from Mesa, Arizona to California. So she moved back to California in April of 2008. And so that is the story that Jodi was telling police about her background, about her relationship with Travis, about their dating experience, and what it was like there afterwards. However, when police began speaking to some of Travis's other friends, they painted a very different picture of this relationship. Now, I also want to point out that before police ever mentioned Jodi's name to anyone in Travis's circle or Travis's family, they asked everyone that they spoke to if there was ever anyone who they thought would want to hurt Travis. That was the question that police were asking Travis's closest friends and family. And to their surprise, several of them said yes. And the name of that person that they claimed would want to hurt Travis was Jodi Arias. Friends of Travis said that it was actually Travis who ended the relationship with Jodi, and it was because Travis became concerned about Jodi's behavior and deemed her to be somewhat crazy and obsessive. Friends described the relationship as being toxic. They also said it was a primarily physical relationship, which was something that Travis struggled with. As I said in the beginning, Travis was very active in his dating life. However, it was something that he had an internal conflict with, and he struggled grappling with the fact that he was so devoted to his faith. However, dating and engaging in sexual behavior outside of marriage was very much frowned upon in the Mormon church and in the Mormon religion. So this was all something that was very, very frustrating and complicated for him to deal with. Travis truly felt like he was going against his religion by giving into the temptation that was Jodi Arias. However, after the breakup, the two did not necessarily cut things off for good. Once Jodi moved to Mesa, Arizona after the breakup had already happened, it wasn't really a surprise to anyone when Travis and Jodi continued to see each other despite them not being in a relationship anymore. They still continued having a sexual relationship with each other, and they really had this physical pull towards each other before Travis ultimately decided that he needed to put an end to the relationship for good, which he did. Now, according to Travis's friends, they claimed that Jodi had consistently attempted to get back into a relationship with Travis and to have him change his mind on the status of their relationship. And each and every time that that did not happen successfully in her favor, she grew more and more angry. Now, Jodi told police that the reason for her moving back to California in April of 2008 was because that Travis did not have the same feelings for her as she did for him, so she wanted to remove herself from that area. And she also claimed that she felt like she was one in a lineup of many of women that dated Travis and that Travis was seeing at the time, and she didn't want to put herself in that situation, so she left. However, despite that, Jodi told authorities that the last time she spoke to Travis was before his murder on Monday, June 2nd, 2008, over the phone. So again, that was just several days prior to his murder. She claimed that while she and Travis were on the phone, she was actually making a road trip from California all the way to Utah, and that during this road trip, she and Travis spoke again for approximately 45 minutes along her way. Now, in terms of this road trip to Utah, Jodi claimed that the primary reason that she was going to Utah to begin with was because there was a PPL conference happening in Salt Lake City. And along with that, she had also met someone who lived out there who she had been recently dating. She was casually dating a man named Ryan Burns, and the two were set to meet once she arrived in Salt Lake City. So, according to Jodi's timeline, she claimed that she left for Utah on the 2nd of June of 2008. She started out in Northern California where she lived and drove to Santa Cruz where she stayed overnight with some friends. The next day, she claims she drove down to Pasadena, California, where she continued to stay with more friends. And then she drove to Utah and arrived in Salt Lake City on June 5th. So she claimed that this road trip from California to Salt Lake City, all in all, took approximately 3 days. Now, police did call Ryan to confirm this story, which he was able to do. He claimed that he did see Jodi on June 5th. He claimed that she arrived to his house at approximately 11 a.m., and she seemed to be in good spirits and didn't seem like anything was wrong that day or was bothering her. Now, the one thing that Ryan did point out to police was that Jodi did have several cuts on her hand. The cuts were along her fingers specifically, and when Ryan asked Jodi about it, she claimed that the cuts were from bartending. Now, when police asked Ryan if there was anything else that pointed out to him as being different about Jodi, he also claimed that she had recently dyed her hair. The last time he saw her, she was a brunette, and once she arrived to his house in Salt Lake City on the 5th, she was platinum blonde. So, for all things considered, Jodi's story in this timeline basically checked out for police at this time. It confirmed when talking to Ryan that Jodi was not there on the 5th and that she had been going on this road trip and her timeline and all of those things. Police also spoke with some of Jodi's other friends who she claimed to have stayed with. Those alibis also checked out. And so, while this was all checking out in Jodi's favor, there was also just something that wasn't sitting right with police. Things were not adding up and things were not making sense. At this point, police had taken DNA samples from other friends of Travis's that did not match any of the DNA that was found at the crime scene. And then when you're looking at standard motive, none of Travis's other friends, no one in his life seemed like they would ever have any motive to do something like this to Travis. And the only person that did seem like she would have some sort of motive in this was Jodi. But along with that, police did have some other information that they had discovered in their investigation that also led them to look more suspiciously at Jodi Arias. I want to talk about the pictures that were discovered from that digital camera that was found in the washing machine, because police were able to recover the pictures from that memory card once they sent them to the forensic lab. Now, from the pictures, many of them were Travis in the shower, and these were dated on June 4th, 2008. So they were dated and time-stamped at approximately 5:30 p.m. Now, like I said, a lot of these pictures were Travis in the shower, almost posing for the camera. It appeared that he was doing some sort of photo shoot with this camera. There were pictures of his side profile, pictures of his back as well. He was dripping in water. But more than just these pictures of Travis, there were also pictures of another person that Travis was with around this same time and on this same date of June 4th. And that other person that was with Travis was Jodi. There were multiple pictures of Jodi, some of her with her clothes on, some of them with her clothes off, some of them of her on Travis's bed, another of Travis in his bed as well. And the most damning picture of all was a picture that was taken during Travis's murder. When police saw this picture, it definitely appeared that the camera had gone off by accident and taken this picture. It didn't appear that this picture was meant to be taken at all. However, in this picture, you see Travis's bloodied body, and while you can't see anyone's face, you can see someone's foot in the picture, and that foot matched Jodi Arias's foot. And so because of this one specific picture, this was able to tell police that Travis's murder took place on June 4th, 2008, around the same time of 5:30 p.m. where all of these other pictures were taken, which leads police to believe that Jodi was with Travis during his murder. And not only that, Jodi was the one who murdered him. Now, if that wasn't bad enough, police also had the physical evidence showing that Jodi was at the scene. Jodi's blood, her hair, and her fingerprints were found in Travis's room. There was a palm print of blood found in Travis's room as well that matched Jodi's fingerprints. I told you earlier that Jodi had voluntarily given police a DNA sample, and that sample came back as a match to the crime scene. So not only do they have the evidence of seeing Jodi with Travis in those pictures at the same date and time that he was murdered, but now they have the physical evidence to prove that she was there as well with the DNA. So now with this information, police bring Jodi Arias down to the station on July 15th, 2008 to have her first in-person interview. Jodi met with the lead detective, Detective Flores, during this interview, and initially they walk through the timeline of Jodi's road trip, the one that she took from California to Utah. Now, repeatedly, Jodi said that she left from Northern California, then went to Santa Cruz, then Pasadena, and during her trip from Pasadena to Salt Lake City, she claimed that while she was meant to stay on Highway 15, she did end up getting lost somewhere along the way, and she claimed that she got off onto the side of the road and slept in her car for 10 hours before continuing on this trip. And what Detective Flores pointed out in this interview was that that timeline didn't make sense for several reasons, because all in all, to get from Northern California to Salt Lake City, it takes you a little over 9 hours, dependent on where you are. However, for Jodi, it took her well over 48 hours. So the point that Detective Flores was trying to make here with Jodi was that it gave her enough time. This time frame that she has planned out would have given her enough time to drive to Mesa, Arizona, see Travis, murder Travis, and then get in the car and drive to Salt Lake City, where she met Ryan Burns at his house at 11 a.m. on June 5th. So that was one of the first things that Detective Flores pointed out to Jodi, and she adamantly denied it. She said that there was no way, she didn't go, she didn't see Travis, none of the above. However, this is when Detective Flores drops another bombshell onto Jodi, and he brings out the pictures from the camera. He brings out all of the pictures that were taken, the ones of her on the bed, the ones of her with Travis, the ones of Travis in the shower, because the pictures don't lie. The picture, clear as day, shows Jodi with Travis at that time. And again, up until this point, Jodi is saying that she was not there. She never saw Travis. The last time she saw Travis in person was in April of 2008. So Detective Flores is now pointing out that that is a bold-faced lie, because not only has Jodi seen Travis since then, she saw him at the exact date and time of his murder. Along with that, he also tells her about the positive DNA samples that linked back to her that were found at the crime scene. Now, while you may think that being confronted with this information would rattle Jodi, it really didn't. She continued to claim that, of course, her DNA would be in the house because she's been to that house so many times. She's been in that room multiple times before. However, the one thing that she could not explain was that bloody palm print that came back as a positive match to her. Now, this interview lasted for hours and hours and hours. And after all of this, Detective Flores realized that he was not getting anywhere with Jodi. Jodi was not budging. And at this time, Detective Flores recognized that he did have enough evidence to follow through with an arrest of Jodi Arias. And that is exactly what he did. Jodi Arias was then arrested for the murder of Travis Alexander. Now, what happens next is honestly very bizarre. After being told she was being placed under arrest, Detective Flores left the interview room, leaving Jodi by herself. And Jodi's behavior became very, very odd and honestly unsettling once this happened. Once Jodi was by herself, she began singing the song "Oh Holy Night." She also started doing handstands up against the walls in the interview room. Now, when told that she was going to be booked and photographed for a mugshot, she then asked Detective Flores if she could fix her makeup and her hair. Detective Flores denied and told her she would not be allowed to do that. However, when she got the picture taken, she asked if her hair looked okay. Now, the following day after her arrest, Jodi was interviewed for a second time, and this time she was interviewed by a female detective. And the tactic here and the hope here was that Jodi was going to feel more comfortable opening up to a female detective. Maybe she would feel like she would be more comfortable talking to another woman. That was the hope in this second interview. However, that did not work, and Jodi actually claimed that she wanted to talk to Detective Flores because he had been the one that had been in contact with Travis's family. Now, a lot of people have claimed from the beginning of this case all the way up until now that Jodi Arias is a master manipulator, and she believes that she is able to manipulate men more specifically. So while Jodi is saying that the reason she wants to talk to Detective Flores is because, she wants to talk to someone who's been talking to Travis's friends and family, a lot of people believe that the real reason is because she actually believes that she will be able to manipulate Detective Flores, who is a man, much easier than she would be able to manipulate a woman. She believes she'll be able to almost flirt through this interview to get Detective Flores to believe what she wants him to believe. But regardless, Detective Flores came back into the room and sat down with Jodi again. And this time, Jodi does open up a little bit more. Jodi tells Detective Flores that on the 2nd of June, Jodi and Travis had had a conversation, and Travis knew that Jodi was going to come and stop by his house on the 3rd because the two of them had discussed it. Jodi claims that she arrived to Travis's home at approximately 3 a.m. on June 4th. She said that the two of them then went to bed and woke up later that afternoon. But this is when Jodi then says something that police were definitely not anticipating. Jodi said that when her and Travis woke up that afternoon, there were two intruders standing in his bedroom, a man and a woman, and that they were the ones that killed Travis and not her. She claimed that she was taking photos of Travis while he was in the shower. They were having a playful moment together, and that the two of them were having a good time when all of a sudden, two people who she describes as white Americans wearing ski masks walked in and attacked Travis, murdering him. Jodi said, quote, "I chickened out like a little bitch. I ran into the closet. He didn't touch me. He just held the gun to my head and was like, 'You don't go anywhere.' And then then he told the other girl to finish it, end quote. She then went on to say, quote, they had an argument back and forth. She wanted to kill me and he didn't. It was obvious that they were there for him, but they didn't say why. End quote. Jodi then said that she did receive a cut on her hand from the struggle that she had between her and the assailant. Jodi claimed that that assailant then took her wallet and found her registration and told her, quote, you must be that bitch from California. If you ever say anything about this, we'll do the same to your family, end quote. Now, luckily, Jodi claimed that this intruder let her go unscathed. However, Travis had been brutally murdered. At this time, Jodi claims that she was so frightened and afraid for her life that she jumped into her car and drove all the way to Salt Lake City without telling a single soul. Now, when Detective Flores heard this, he did not believe it. Not for a single second. He even told Jodi that this was the most far-fetched story that he had ever heard in all of his years of police work. However, Jodi was not budging. She was insistent on the fact that this is exactly what happened and how it happened. But again, no one else was believing her. Jodi was the only one who was believing this story that she was telling herself about these two assailants. Nothing about it made sense. When Jodi saw Ryan the very next day, Ryan claimed that Jodi was in good spirits, didn't seem like anything was wrong, nothing was bothering her. Along with that, Jodi never called the police, never called 911 on her way to Salt Lake City, never ran down the hall to try and get one of Travis's roommates after the fact. She just jumped in the car and she drove off. And for all things considered, no one was buying it. And at this point, the case was headed to trial. Now, the media and the publicity that this case got was something that no one could have predicted. The interest from the public that this beautiful woman who seemed calm, kept her composure, kind and soft-spoken on the outside, could have stabbed someone 27 times, almost decapitating them and then shooting them in the head was something that was so outlandish and hard for everyone to wrap their heads around. And I truly believe that that is part of the reason that this case has gotten so much notoriety over the years. Now, while Jodi's defense lawyers were gearing up for trial, the prosecution was preparing their case, Jodi also kept herself busy because she was doing several media interviews from jail where she maintained her innocence. She claimed that she had never even shot a real gun before, and what happened to Travis was heinous. However, she was not the culprit. Jodi really was speaking to anyone with a camera that pointed at her at this point, and for her defense team, this was incredibly frustrating because part of the defense's strategy was they didn't want Jodi talking, and that goes for most defense lawyers. They don't want the person they're defending going out in the media and talking to the public. They don't want them to say anything that could eventually be used against them or be talked about in trial. They just want them to wait until the trial and keep quiet. However, Jodi was doing anything and everything but that at the time. So the prosecution for this case, the lead prosecutor was a man named Juan Martinez from the Maricopa County Attorney's Office, and he is an extremely talented prosecutor. He's known for being a shark of a lawyer, and he knew immediately that he wanted to go for the death penalty in this case with Jodi Arias. He was seeking out the death penalty for Jodi, and when Martinez was going over all of the information from the case, what he was really trying to find was the argument that this was premeditated murder, because that was how they were really going to be able to nail down that death penalty. Now, the defense, on the other hand, the lead defense attorney was Kirk Nurmi. According to Kirk, he claimed that when he met Jodi for the first time, her demeanor was very casual, much more casual than what is typically expected from someone who's being charged with murder. But over time, Jodi became much more demanding, so he says. Kirk claimed that she was calling him every single day, asking Kirk to watch her cat for a while she was in jail. It was just very unusual behavior as a whole, and Kirk was able to recognize that. Now, the preparation for this trial, it really did take years. Kirk knew the story that Jodi was saying about these two intruders, but he also knew that that story was not going to be able to hold up in trial. It was not going to stand a chance in trial, quite simply because it did not make a lot of sense. There was no footage of these intruders, no security cameras, no evidence to suggest intruders. The roommates didn't hear anything. It just was not going to stand in trial. So, because of that, in June 2010, Jodi ended up changing her story again. And this time, Jodi now claims that she, in fact, did kill Travis. She accepted the fact that she was the one who ended Travis's life. She was the one who murdered Travis, that there were no intruders ever, and that that story was a lie. However, she did claim that the murder was in self-defense. Now, the trial began on January 2nd, 2013, at the Maricopa County Superior Court, and people dropped everything for this trial. They flew in to stand outside the courtroom. They would wait outside from the day before to potentially get an open seat. The swarm of people was wild. Now, when we look at the opening statements, the prosecution really narrowed down on the brutality of this murder. They also narrowed down that this was not a whodunit case. We already had the who in this case. Jodi had already admitted to the fact and confessed that she was the killer. And they also talked a lot about motive. They talked about jealousy, sex, love, and rage, and how Jodi wanted to be with Travis, but Travis did not want to be with her. Martinez really emphasized the injuries that Travis sustained, how horrible they were, the self-defense wounds that he had, and how they were not consistent with Jodi's claims of self-defense. Now, the defense, on the other hand, they really painted a very different picture of Travis. They said that Travis was an abuser. They portrayed the relationship between Jodi and Travis to be, quote unquote, a dirty little secret. They claimed that Travis left Jodi no other option but to kill him. Now, according to the defense, they claimed that on June 4th, 2008, while Jodi and Travis were together and Jodi was taking pictures of him in the shower, she ended up dropping this digital camera by accident, damaging it. Now, according to them, they said that this then sent Travis into a murderous rage, and in order to defend herself, Jodi had to kill him. Now, when looking at the witnesses in this trial, Mimi Hall ended up taking the stand. Remember, she was the one who was meant to go to Cancun with Travis the day after his body was discovered. Now, the prosecution called Mimi Hall, and during her testimony, she portrayed Travis as a very stand-up guy. She claimed that she felt good and safe around Travis. She said that the two of them went on a few dates before Mimi ultimately decided that she just wanted to be friends. But during those dates, Travis was very respectful. He never made any inappropriate or sexual remarks, and that the most that they ever did physically was hug. Now, during her testimony, Mimi also had stated that in the months leading up to Travis's murder, Travis had confided in Mimi that he believed that he had a stalker. Now, while Travis never disclosed the exact name of who he believed his stalker was, he did tell her that the stalker was a woman and that she would do things like break into his bank accounts, his email accounts. She slashed his tires on multiple occasions and even broke into his house through his doggy door and slept on the couch while he was not home. Now, the medical examiner who conducted the autopsy also took the stand, and he confirmed all of the injuries: the stab wounds, the 27 stab wounds, the throat slit, the self-defense wound on his hands, and the gunshot to the head. Now, during the trial, a big question mark here was this gun that was used to shoot Travis. It's explained through the prosecution that on May 28th of 2008, police did respond to a burglary in Northern California. And when arriving to the home, police were speaking to the couple who owned the house. It was an elderly couple named the Allens. They go on to explain that their house had been robbed and that there were several things taken from the home, like a DVD player, a CD player, and a 25 caliber gun. Now, while they were talking to police, they claimed that a car had pulled up in the driveway, and when police asked the Allens who the car was, they claimed that it was their granddaughter. And who walks out of the car that just pulled up in the driveway? Jodi Arias. So because of this, the prosecution painted this picture that Jodi had actually stolen this gun from her grandparents with the intention of shooting Travis Alexander with it. And again, this happened just 1 week prior to Travis's murder. Now, another witness that the defense had actually brought to the stand was Jodi's ex-boyfriend named Daryl. Now, this was the boyfriend that Jodi had actually left to be with Travis for, the one that she was in a long-term relationship with, that she had been with for quite some time. This was that same boyfriend. The two of them had dated from 2002 to 2006. And while on the stand, Daryl explained that Jodi was a very responsible, caring, and loving person. He explained that she had a great relationship with Daryl's son and that the two were very close. Now, the defense did this really to try and humanize Jodi Arias because up until this point, everyone is just looking at her as this murderer. However, the defense wanted to bring that back and reel it in a little bit and show her as who she was before this happened. And that really was their big strategy. It was showing the jury that Jodi never had any signs of a violent streak, any signs of any of this bizarre behavior that everyone's talking about up until she met Travis Alexander. So that was Daryl's testimony to the defense. However, when Martinez cross-examined Daryl, this is when things began to get a little bit suspicious because Daryl explained that on June 3rd, the day prior to the murder, Jodi had reached out to him and asked if she could borrow some gas cans. Now, while Daryl did believe that this was an odd request, he ended up giving her the gas cans once she arrived to his house. Now, the prosecution's theory here was that the reason that Jodi wanted these gas cans to begin with was so she would be able to get to Arizona and leave Arizona without ever being seen on any surveillance, without ever having a financial transaction or any like gas station footage, any of those things. Throughout her trip to Salt Lake City, she had many receipts along the way. However, all of those receipts were while she was in California. None of them were while she was in Arizona. And the prosecution believes that this was because she didn't want anyone knowing that she was going to be there during that time. So she filled up these gas cans prior to leaving California because once she got to Arizona, she wanted to be untraced until she left. Now, this again for the prosecution really did prove premeditation. It proved that from the beginning of this trip, Jodi knew that she was going to be going to Arizona with the intention of killing Travis. Because if she wasn't, why would it matter if she was seen on surveillance? Why would it matter if she had a financial transaction? To go so far out of your way as to filling up gas cans so you're not seen, it definitely seemed suspicious. Now, to everyone's shock and surprise, I don't think anyone saw this coming in this trial. Jodi did end up testifying in her own trial. And again, her story had changed several times throughout the course of the investigation. So putting her on the stand truly was a gamble, but everyone was glued in listening to her. Now, it wasn't a shock to anyone that Jodi and the defense's main goal was to paint Travis as the bad guy. However, the lengths that they went to and the details that they showed in order to do that was pretty shocking to most people. And again, to the outside world, Travis Alexander was this stand-up guy, this true Mormon man. However, during this trial, the sexual fantasies that Travis was alleged to have had got exploited, and it definitely wasn't what people expected. During the trial, the defense read out several different text messages that Travis had sent to Jodi, including him saying, quote, "You will rejoice in being a whore that's sole purpose in life is to be mine, to have animalistic sex with, and to please me in any way I desire," end quote. Jodi also went on to describe several accounts of what she says was Travis sexually assaulting and raping her. She also went as far as to say that she walked in on Travis watching child pornography. Now, as you can imagine, this was incredibly devastating for Travis's family to have to sit through and listen while they were in the stands of this trial. They showed up for Travis day in and day out during this trial to show their support for Travis. And so to hear all of these things come out, it was incredibly hard for them to listen to, because to them, this was not the Travis that they knew. And they felt like Jodi was going to the worst of the worst lengths, the most insulting things that you could ever say about someone, the most diabolical things that you could say about someone who has already been so brutally murdered, only for the purpose of trying to say that she's innocent. Now, while Jodi was on the stand, the defense also played a recorded phone call that Jodi had recorded of her and Travis having phone sex. This conversation took place on May 10th, 2008. It's a very explicit conversation. However, during it, Travis compares the noises that Jodi is making to a 12-year-old girl and describes it as being hot. Now, this obviously helped the defense in trying to prove this point that Travis had a very perverted mind and a perverted fantasy. However, others thought that the fact that this phone call was recorded was also strange, and it led people to question if Jodi recorded Travis on purpose because she was trying to set Travis up. Now, especially because Jodi never stopped Travis during this phone call. It was never questioned the things that he was saying. She definitely went along with what he was saying in the moment. Now, during her testimony, Jodi again recounted what exactly happened on the early evening hours of June 4th, 2008. She claimed that she was taking pictures of Travis, and once she dropped this camera, he got angry at her. She claimed that he told her that she wasn't taking the pictures properly and then body slammed her onto the bathroom floor. She claimed that she began running down the hallway and he was chasing her. She then went into the closet and shut the door, and she claimed that that is where he kept his gun. She claimed she then grabbed the gun, and when Travis opened the door, she was pointing the gun at him, hoping in her mind, so she says, that it would cause Travis to back down and back away. However, instead, she said that Travis then lunged at her and the gun went off without her knowing, and she didn't mean to shoot him. She actually claimed that the gunshot to his head did not kill him and that the two began wrestling before she was able to get away from him. Now, from the medical examiner's standpoint, the medical examiner has always said that for the timeline and the sequence of events, it is believed that Jodi stabbed and then shot Travis because of those self-defense wounds on his hands. The medical examiner states that there would be no way for Travis to get shot in the head and then attempt to block himself and get all of these self-defense wounds. He believes that Jodi stabbed Travis at first and then shot him at the very end. However, again, Jodi is saying that that's not what happened, that she shot Travis first, and then once she was able to get away from him, she started stabbing him. However, she claims she does not remember stabbing him. She said that she went into a fog, blacked out, and does not remember stabbing him whatsoever. But now, it is the prosecution's turn to cross-examine Jodi, and this was the first time that the jury is able to really see the feisty side of Jodi. Up until this point, like I said, she's been soft-spoken, she's been quiet, she's been cool, calm, collected, but Martinez, as I mentioned, is a shark of a lawyer, but Jodi was not backing down to him either. During her cross-examination with the prosecution, Martinez brought up a journal that Jodi had that had hundreds and hundreds of entries, but never once did she mention anything about Travis's alleged physical abuse or his alleged view of child pornography, his mental abuse, none of it. She never spoke of any of that in these journal entries, but Jodi claims that the reason that she never wrote about it was because of the law of attraction. She felt like if she wrote about these things and wrote about these instances, that it would make them more reoccurring, because what you put out into the world, you're evidently going to attract back into it. And so that was her fear in talking about these things in her journal entries. Now, during Jodi's testimony, she claimed that during one of the physical altercations that her and Travis had, Travis kicked her finger so badly that it permanently bent it. And she did end up showing her finger during trial, and it was visibly bent. Now, Jodi claims that this incident happened in January of 2008. However, Martinez found pictures of Jodi from 5 months later in April 2008, where her finger looked completely normal. Now, Martinez's theory to the jury was that the injury from Jodi's finger happened during the murder of Travis, and that it was a result of her attacking him. So he doesn't think that this incident in January ever happened, because there's evidence to prove picture evidence that Jodi's finger had been fine in the months leading up to the murder. Now, all in all, Jodi was on the stand for 18 days, which really was unheard of, or at least it was up until this point, and the trial concluded in May of 2013. The jury deliberated for 15 hours, and on May 8th, the jury found Jodi Arias guilty of first-degree murder. Now, the public who were waiting outside of the courtroom's reaction from this verdict was one of a celebration. People were cheering, chanting justice for Travis. The jury claimed that at the end of the day, there was no possibility that this was a murder of self-defense, given the extent of Travis's injury. Now, while it is shocking but not surprising, Jodi actually gave a Fox interview minutes after her guilty verdict was read. During this interview, she said that while the verdict was being read, she went blank and that she felt overwhelmed. She said that the verdict was unexpected, and she claimed that she would rather get death than life in regards to her sentencing. She said that she felt death was the ultimate freedom for her, and she would rather have that sooner than later. Now, 2 weeks after the trial concluded was Jodi's sentencing, and Jodi did speak during this. During her speech, she claimed that her goal was never to expose Travis, and that in fact, she wanted to preserve his reputation. She also brought out a shirt that she claimed to have designed, which was a plain white t-shirt with the word survivor on it, and she stated that 100% of the proceeds were going to go to victims of domestic violence. Now, this really was just another backhanded remark by Jodi, and it left a lot of people with a bad taste in their mouth. Now, at the end of Jodi's speech, she ended up going back on what she said before about wanting the death penalty and said that she wanted life in prison now only for the sake of her family. So now the jury had to decide whether or not Jodi was going to receive the death penalty or life in prison, and they actually could not agree on this. 8 of them voted for the death penalty, and 4 of them voted to get life in prison. And because it wasn't a unanimous decision, there was a sentencing mistrial. So what that meant was that even though Jodi was still convicted for first-degree murder, the court had to go through the entire penalty phase again with a new jury. And this then took place a year and a half later in 2015. And it took several weeks for the defense and the prosecution to make their case to the jury as to why or why not Jodi should receive death. And after those few weeks had concluded and the jury began their deliberations, the second jury began their deliberations, they were deadlocked again, leading to a second mistrial. Now, this time it was 11 jurors voting for the death penalty and only 1 for life in prison. But again, it has to be a unanimous decision, which it was not. Now, there is no trying for the death penalty again at this point because under law in Arizona, the prosecution only gets 2 chances on getting the death penalty. And if you don't get it after that, you can't try for it again. So Jodi Arias received life in prison without the possibility of parole in April of 2015, and she is currently serving her sentence at the Perryville Prison for Women in Phoenix, Arizona. And that, you guys, is the case of Travis Alexander and Jodi Arias. I am so curious to hear what you guys have to say about this case, what your thoughts are on everything from start to finish. Please let me know in the comments below. And with that being said, you guys, that is all for me today. Thank you guys so much for tuning in to another episode of Killer Instinct. Again, if you're new here, hi, my name is Savannah and I'm your host of Killer Instinct. Make sure you go ahead and hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. That way you never miss an episode. We post weekly on the podcast every single Wednesday. You're not going to want to miss it. I'll be back next week with a brand new one for you guys. And until then, stay safe. Bye, guys.